The chamber was never quiet. It was a place of noise, of gavel strikes, whispers, and sharp words slicing through the air like blades. But on this day, something unimaginable happened. The room, crowded with power and pride, fell into an almost sacred silence. Byron Donalds had stood up. At first, it looked like just another speech in a sea of speeches, another moment for cameras to capture conflict. Reporters lifted their phones, bracing for fire. Jasmine Crockett, seated a few rows across, folded her notes, expecting another clash of ideology. Yet the tone that followed wasn't combative. It was calm. Almost reverent. Madam Chair, Donalds began, voice steady, low. Before we move on, I want to say something that might surprise a few people. A few quiet laughs scattered across the room. His colleagues smirked, assuming a punchline was coming. But Donalds wasn't joking. His face carried no hint of sarcasm, no edge of political theater. It carried something rarer. Humility. I've disagreed with Representative Crockett on just about everything. He continued, but I cannot deny her integrity, her consistency. She stands by what she believes, and she does it with dignity. That deserves acknowledgement. The words hung in the air like an unspoken prayer. No one moved. No one breathed. The silence deepened, almost tangible. Cameras caught the flicker of disbelief across Crockett's face, the slight widening of her eyes, the flicker of something softer behind her poise, and then a sound. One pair of hands clapping, then another. Then a third. Applause. Hesitant at first, then growing. The chamber, so often divided by ideology and ego, momentarily united in respect. Even those who'd spent years dismissing Crockett now joined in. It was as if the room itself exhaled after holding its breath for too long. For a fleeting second. The walls that separated left and right seemed to crumble. Donalds nodded once, then quietly took his seat, his gaze steady, his expression unreadable. Crockett offered a small, composed nod in return. No theatrics, no performance. Just grace meeting grace. Across social media feeds, the moment was already spreading. Clips captioned integrity recognized and unexpected respect flashed across millions of screens. Commentators would soon debate what it meant, whether it was genuine, strategic, or simply human. But in that instant, none of that mattered. What mattered was that, in the most polarized room in America, one man had chosen acknowledgement over attack, and one woman, long a target of dismissal, stood recognized in full view of the nation. The silence that began in the chamber rippled outward into homes, feeds, and conversations. It wasn't just quiet anymore. It was reflection. Because if Byron Donalds could stand up and commend Jasmine Crockett, what else might still be possible in a country so divided? The moment felt like a whisper from a better version of America, one that still remembered how to listen, how to honor conviction even in opposition. The applause rose again, filling the room like a heartbeat. But what came before this applause was weeks of bitter hostility that made this moment nearly impossible. Long before the silence and the applause, there was noise, the kind that echoed through cable news panels, Twitter threads, and endless hearings where tempers ran hotter than the summer lights over the Capitol dome. The House chamber had become a theater of conflict, and two of its sharpest voices seemed destined to collide. Byron Donalds. The rising conservative star from Florida had built his reputation on defiance. He didn't flinch. He didn't compromise. To his supporters, he was strength personified, a man who said what others were afraid to. To his critics, he was something else entirely, a provocateur, a performer who wielded confidence like a weapon. Every soundbite, every sharp exchange, was ammunition in the never-ending war of ideology. Across the aisle. Jasmine Crockett had carved out her own path, different in style, but identical in intensity. Where Donalds thundered, she dissected. Where he raised his voice, she raised her evidence. A former public defender, She'd learned early that power often spoke louder than truth, and she'd made it her mission to balance that scale. Her voice, fierce, precise, unapologetic, had become a rallying cry for those who felt unseen and unheard. Asterisk, 2 stories. 2 fires. Both burning bright enough to blind. Asterisk, for months, their paths had crossed in hearings and headlines. Each encounter added tension. Clash a spark feeding something larger. The sense that these two embodied the great divide of modern America. Donalds bold, traditional, unapologetically conservative. Crockett modern, unflinching, rooted in justice and community. Both convinced they were right. Both unyielding. Asterisk, the media loved it. Clips of their exchanges played in endless loops. Commentators framed it as rivalry, as if politics were a sport and civility, the losing team. Audiences took sides, hashtags emerged, fan bases clashed, pundits profited. But beneath the spectacle, there was something deeper happening, to people who, for all their differences, shared a dangerous similarity: authenticity. Asterisk, Donalds had always seen politics as a test of dominance. Crockett saw it as a test of truth. Yet, the irony was that both fought from the same instinct, the belief that their voices mattered more than the noise surrounding them. It was this collision of conviction, not party, that made their encounters feel seismic. Asterisk, in committee rooms lined with cameras, their debates often drew crowds. Aides whispered. Journalists leaned forward, waiting for the next viral soundbite. Donalds, with his commanding presence, knew how to fill a room. Crockett, with her piercing logic and quiet authority, knew how to reclaim it. Every hearing became a dual intellect versus charisma. Calm against swagger, precision battling performance. Asterisk, still. Somewhere beneath that tension, something unspoken was forming, a reluctant respect. Donalds noticed the way Crockett never wavered, even when provoked. Crockett, in turn, couldn't ignore the flashes of sincerity behind Donalds's bravado. They were both warriors, fighting different wars on the same battlefield. Asterisk, outside the chamber. America watched with weary fascination. Comment threads became digital battlegrounds. One half cheered Byron's boldness, the other hailed Jasmine's composure. But no one expected what was coming, that these two voices forged in opposition would one day share a moment of mutual grace. Asterisk, the pressure kept building. Every committee hearing became a test of endurance. Every headline sharpened the contrast. The air in Washington was thick with rivalry, but it wasn't personal, not yet. They were symbols now, stand-ins for millions, who'd stopped listening to each other and started shouting instead. Asterisk. And then came that day, the hearing that would change everything. Both were scheduled to speak. Both came prepared for war. The stage was set, the cameras primed, the country watching. Asterisk, neither knew that before the session ended. The narrative of their feud would twist into something no scriptwriter could have crafted, a display of respect that would ripple across America. Asterisk. They were two forces on a collision course, not to destroy each other, but to reveal something larger than either could have planned. Asterisk. They were about to prove that even in the heart of division, integrity could still echo louder than applause. Asterisk, before he ever set foot in Congress. Byron Donalds was a man accustomed to walking against the current. Born in Brooklyn and raised by a single mother, he had learned early how to survive in a world that didn't hand out favors. Faith, determination, and defiance shaped him long before politics ever entered the picture. He wasn't born into power. He fought his way toward it, brick by brick. Belief by belief. Asterisk, his journey into politics wasn't clean or convenient. It was loud. From the moment he began speaking at rallies, his voice carried a rhythm that split audiences. Some rose to their feet, others crossed their arms. He was magnetic because he was polarizing. He didn't seek applause. He sought reaction. Every debate, every panel appearance, every viral clip seemed to confirm one thing: Byron Donalds was not afraid to offend if it meant being honest. Asterisk, to his supporters. That made him a hero, a man who spoke what they thought but dared not say. To his critics, it made him dangerous, a provocateur cloaked in confidence. The truth was more complicated. Underneath the showmanship was a man who'd built his armor out of scrutiny. He'd learned to use confrontation not just as a shield, but as a language of survival. Asterisk when he entered Congress, the institution itself seemed to test him. The marble floors carried centuries of tradition, but he brought something rawer, an energy that disrupted. His speeches were sharp, his tone unflinching. He didn't hesitate to challenge authority, even within his own party. That defiance earned him both admiration and exile. He was too bold for comfort, too independent for loyalty. But Byron thrived on resistance. The louder the pushback, the stronger he stood. Asterisk behind closed doors, though, there were moments few ever saw. Late nights in his office, staring at headlines that painted him as either savior or villain. He'd scroll through the noise, aware that every sentence he spoke was being dissected, twisted, remixed into outrage. The Byron Donalds the world saw was a fighter. The one he saw in the mirror was a man trying to keep his conviction intact in a system built on compromise. And then came Jasmine Crockett, the rising Democratic voice who challenged him in hearings with precision and poise. At first, she was just another opponent, another ideological obstacle to outmaneuver. But something about her unnerved him, not because she shouted, but because she didn't. When she spoke, the room listened. When she was attacked, she didn't flinch. In her calm, he recognized something familiar, the same fire that had driven him years ago. Still, pride ran deep. Their clashes became headline fuel. He'd deliver a cutting remark. She'd parry with fact and composure. The public saw rivalry. What Byron began to feel was reflection, a mirror he didn't expect. For every jab he threw, she returned one with clarity, not anger. It disarmed him more than any shouting match could. But humility was not his instinct. He doubled down, louder, bolder, unwilling to let an opponent claim ground. His party cheered him for it. Yet beneath the surface, that flicker of respect refused to die. In private moments, he found himself replaying their exchanges, not to mock, but to measure himself. Why did her words stay with him when so many others didn't? Perhaps it was because Crockett represented something he had long forgotten, the courage to stay soft in a hard world. She didn't weaponize her identity. She wielded it as proof of resilience. And though he'd never admit it, he admired that. Because despite his strength, there were days Byron wondered if his armor had become a cage keeping him safe. But separate from empathy, he carried that inner tension into every public moment. Cameras caught the grin, the swagger, the boldness. They never caught the flicker of doubt. The quiet thought that maybe conviction without compassion wasn't victory at all. As the months passed, the unspoken rivalry between Donalds and Crockett evolved into something larger, an ideological duel that symbolized the entire nation's divide. Every committee hearing felt like an arena. Every exchange drew eyes. Both knew that neither could afford to lose composure. But one day soon, the firebrand would face a decision no headline could predict, whether to keep fighting or to finally acknowledge the humanity across the aisle. And when that moment arrived, it wouldn't just test his politics. It would test his pride, because across from him sat someone he had once seen as an opponent, but was slowly learning to see as an equal. But across the aisle, another story was being written, one forged in fire, criticism, and quiet resilience, before the spotlight. Before the viral clips, Jasmine Crockett was a defender of people, of truth, of herself. Long before she ever stepped onto the floor of Congress, she was standing in cramped courtrooms, fighting for those who couldn't afford justice. Her voice wasn't born from privilege or legacy. It was carved from resistance. She grew up watching systems fail those who looked like her. Neighbors evicted for reasons that made no sense. Clients criminalized for mistakes the wealthy could erase with a check. The law fascinated her because it was supposed to be fair, but she learned early it often wasn't. So she made herself a weapon of fairness. Every late night studying, every case argued, every loss absorbed, it all built a steel inside her that no insult could bend. When she ran for office, few believed she could win. The odds were uneven. the expectations lower. But Jasmine Crockett didn't ask permission. She walked into the political arena with the same focus she'd brought to the courtroom, prepared, grounded, fearless. Her campaign slogan was simple: Asterisk truth needs a seat at the table. When she won, she didn't just bring truth. She brought the voice of every person who'd ever been underestimated. Congress wasn't built for people like her, outspoken, brilliant, and unwilling to play the game. The moment she arrived, the murmurs began. Too aggressive, too emotional, too much. Words meant to shrink her. She smiled through them, knowing that strength in a woman, especially a black woman, has always been mistaken for anger by those uncomfortable with power they couldn't control. But she didn't flinch. When the hearings got ugly, she didn't match insult with insult. She matched ignorance with fact. Her composure became her armor, her logic the sword no one saw coming. And when others folded under pressure, Jasmine held her ground, her voice measured, her words precise. She wasn't just debating policy. She was dismantling bias, one statement at a time. Yet behind her calm, there was exhaustion. The kind that comes from always having to prove you belong. Late nights, endless scrutiny, headlines that dissected her tone instead of her ideas. Some days it felt like she was walking a tightrope suspended over a pit of double standards. One misstep, and the narrative would swallow her whole. But quitting was never an option. She had seen too much, fought too hard, carried too many expectations from those who needed her to keep going. Her colleagues learned quickly Crockett wasn't someone you could rattle. Her preparation was legendary. She read everything. She watched every clip. She could quote obscure rulings like they were lyrics. Every question she asked during hearings carried the weight of intention. Every statement hit like a scalpel. Precise, unflinching, devastatingly calm. And yet she wasn't cold. Her warmth was quiet, not loud. It was in the way she greeted staff, the patience she showed interns, the way she thanked security guards by name. Beneath her strength was empathy, a reminder that power doesn't have to crush to be respected. It can protect. But that compassion didn't make her naive. She saw what politics did to people, how it turned conviction into theater. She promised herself she wouldn't become part of the noise. She would never trade authenticity for applause. Then came Byron Donalds. At first, he was everything she disliked about Washington, confident to the edge of arrogance, dismissive, loud. His words sometimes carried the same undertones she'd battled her entire life. Their exchanges and hearings were tense, electric. Cameras loved them. The internet amplified them. The narratives wrote themselves, the firebrand versus the truth-teller. But Jasmine saw something deeper than bluster. She saw intelligence, and more importantly, she saw humanity buried under bravado. Still, she refused to give ground. Every time he postured, she countered with poise. Every time he raised his voice, she raised the bar. Her restraint became her rebellion. She refused to let anyone drag her into the chaos that consumed so many others. And though the public watched their confrontations, like episodes of a political drama, what they didn't see was the discipline behind her every word. She understood what it meant to represent, not just herself, but everyone who'd been silenced, doubted, or dismissed. So when she spoke for them, not for clicks, not for clout, but for the countless unheard voices echoing behind her. There were nights she went home exhausted, shoulders heavy with the weight of visibility. Being the first, the loudest, the fearless, came with a cost. But every morning, she rose again, put on her calm like armor, and walked back into the noise with grace. Because dignity, she believed, wasn't just a virtue, it was resistance. And so, when the next confrontation came, when Donalds challenged her yet again, eyes sharp, tone cutting, she didn't flinch. She smiled slightly, met his gaze, and waited for the storm to pass. Her silence wasn't surrender. It was strength. She had faced countless attacks before, but not like the one that would come next in front of millions. The chamber lights burned bright, as the air charged with tension. Every seat was filled, every camera trained, every whisper stilled. It was another committee hearing, or so it seemed. But beneath the polished formality, there was a pulse, a quiet electricity. Everyone knew that when Byron Donalds and Jasmine Crockett were in the same room, something memorable was bound to happen. Donalds leaned forward, notes spread before him, ready to strike. His voice carried the practiced authority of a man who'd done this 100 times. "Let's talk about accountability," he began, gaze sweeping across the room before landing on her. "Some members here claim to fight for justice, but forget it when it's inconvenient." The jab was clear. All eyes flicked to Crockett. She didn't flinch. Her hands rested lightly on her notes, her face calm, her focus steady. When she finally spoke, her voice cut through the air, measured, deliberate, unwavering. "Accountability," she echoed softly, "isn't about who can shout at the loudest. It's about who can stand by it when the cameras turn off." A ripple moved through the room. Donald smirked, but the edge in his eyes softened just slightly. She wasn't rattled. She never was. He fired back, pressing harder, building momentum. "Then maybe you should start with your own side," he said, his tone sharpened with confidence. The words hung in the air, heavy and provocative. A few members murmured, others exchanged glances, waiting for her to crack. But Crockett didn't rise to the bait. She leaned forward, eyes locked on his, her tone as cool as marble. "Maybe," she said, "we should start with honesty no matter what side we're on." The silence that followed wasn't ordinary. It was the kind that freezes an entire room. It turns political theater into something uncomfortably real. Donalds blinked just once, and for a moment. The veneer of control slipped. Her words had cut deeper than expected, not because they attacked him, but because they revealed him. The confidence returned quickly, but the audience had already felt the shift. The energy had changed. Crockett continued, not attacking, but illuminating. "You and I both represent people who expect more than division. They expect truth. They expect courage. If we can't give them that, then what are we doing here?" Her voice carried no venom. It's only conviction, the kind that silences cynicism. Donald straightened in his seat, his jaw tight. He wanted to interrupt, to reclaim the momentum. But her calm had disarmed him. Every rebuttal he'd prepared suddenly felt small against the weight of her composure. For a moment. Even the cameras seemed to hesitate. The room, so used to noise, found itself trapped in quiet awe. The chairman cleared his throat, trying to break the tension. "The gentlewoman's time has expired," he said. But the audience wasn't ready to move on. Journalists scribbled furiously. A few members of the gallery exchanged wide-eyed looks. Something had happened here. Something unscripted. Something genuine. Donald spoke again, softer now. "I hear you, Representative Crockett," he said, voice lower, as if acknowledging a point he hadn't expected to concede. "But pride doesn't yield easily. Still, I think the record should reflect that I stand by what I said." Crockett nodded once. "And I'll let the record reflect that I'm not afraid of it." The crowd exhaled as if they'd been holding their breath. The tension dissolved, but the weight of what had passed lingered. There was no clear winner, no applause yet, only respect buried beneath the surface, reluctant but undeniable. The hearing moved on, but the story had already taken root. Cameras replayed the exchange again and again. Commentators debated who had won, missing the point entirely. It wasn't about winning anymore. It was about something purer, two voices testing the limits of conviction, one pushing with force, the other standing firm with grace. And though neither of them knew it yet, this clash, this brief, electrifying collision of confidence and composure had set the stage for what was to come. Because the next time they met, it wouldn't end in silence. It would end in applause. And then, just when it seemed the clash would end in bitterness, everything changed. The hearing room buzzed. Like a hive after the exchange. Reporters huddled in corners, aides whispered. And the chatter of a dozen networks scrambled to frame the moment. Who won, who lost, who blinked first. But Jasmine Crockett sat motionless, eyes fixed on her notes. The soft hum of tension around her dissolving into background noise. She had been here before, Not this exact fight, but this feeling. The battle between dignity and spectacle, between truth and perception. Byron Donalds watched her from across the room. His expression had softened, though his instincts still braced for war. He had expected outrage, maybe a flash of anger, something he could parry, something familiar. Instead, he found restraint, grace, and it unsettled him more than any rebuttal could have. Later that evening. As the Capitol corridors emptied, Crockett walked alone through the marble hallways, heels echoing faintly against the cold floor. Each step carried the weight of 1,000 small battles. Not televised, not quoted, but real. She thought of her mother's voice years ago, reminding her that anger is easy. Grace takes work. Tonight, she understood that truth more than ever. Meanwhile, Donalds lingered in his office, scrolling through clips of their exchange already circulating online. Commentators were calling it the clash of conviction, a rare moment of decorum. He smirked at the headlines, but his reflection in the dark glass behind the screen looked uneasy. He hadn't expected to respect her, not like this. He leaned back, eyes closing for a moment. He knew politics was theater, but something about her performance didn't feel performed. It felt earned. The next morning, the nation had chosen sides. Hashtags flooded the timeline. Hashtag Team Jasmine. Hashtag DONALDSV's Crockett. Hashtag Grace Under Fire. Pundits dissected tone, posture, even breathing. But amid the noise, a quieter truth began to surface. People were hungry for moments of authenticity, for glimpses of humanity in the marble halls of power, and somehow, through the smoke of partisanship, Jasmine Crockett had given them that. At a press conference that day, she faced the cameras once again. Representative Donalds and I disagree, she said evenly, but disagreement doesn't have to mean disrespect. My job is to fight for the people I represent, with courage, not contempt. There was a murmur of approval, flashes bursting like small explosions. Her voice carried through the screens of millions who saw themselves in her, resilient, self-possessed, unshaken. Donald S., standing just down the hall, caught part of the broadcast. Something in him stirred not resentment, but a flicker of something rarer in Washington. Admiration. It wasn't that she had bested him. It was that she had refused to descend to the level he'd expected. In doing so, she had lifted the whole exchange above the ordinary grind of politics. She had made it human. By the end of the week. The hearing video had gone viral, not for its hostility, but for its poise. Young activists shared it as proof that integrity could still cut through noise. Immigrants and first-generation Americans replayed it as a lesson in standing tall in rooms designed to shrink you. It was no longer just politics. It was a mirror reflecting back a version of themselves they wanted to believe in. For Jasmine. The attention was both heavy and empowering. She knew that moments like this came rarely, and they came with a price. The next fight would be harder, the scrutiny sharper, but for now, she let the weight sit on her shoulders, steady and familiar. Grace wasn't just what she showed the world. It was how she survived it. Then came the call. A senior member of the committee, an old guard, Republican known for his sharp tongue and sharper elbows, wanted to speak. Representative Crockett, he said when she answered, his voice unexpectedly warm. You've earned a kind of respect around here that most don't. She didn't quite know what to say. Washington needs more of that, he continued. Don't lose it. After the call, she sat in silence, letting the words settle. Respect in politics wasn't a gift. It was a recognition wrestled from those who had none to spare. Across the city. Byron Donalds was having his own moment of reflection. During an interview on a conservative talk show, the host pressed him, Congressman, any regrets about your exchange with Representative Crockett? Donalds paused. The easy answer was to double down, to signal strength. But he surprised even himself. No regrets, he said slowly. She stood her ground, and I can respect that. It was a small statement, but in a city built on grudges, it was revolutionary. The clip circulated quietly at first, then caught fire. Viewers who expected animosity found something deeper: acknowledgement. A bridge, however fragile, between two forces who had every reason to despise each other, but chose something higher instead. Asterisk, and so. The narrative shifted again. Not hero versus villain, not black versus white, not left versus right, but to people different, defiant, dignified, sharing a sliver of common humanity. Asterisk, as the week closed, Jasmine Crockett walked once more into the chamber. The same marble, the same microphones, the same air, thick with expectation. But this time, when Byron Donalds saw her enter, he didn't brace for combat. He stood. Asterisk, and before the murmurs could spread, he said it simple, unexpected, genuine. Asterisk, Madam Representative, he began, voice echoing through the chamber, I want to commend you. Not for agreeing with me, but for standing by what you believe with grace and integrity. Asterisk, the silence that followed was absolute. Every camera froze. Every head turned, and then, slowly, a wave of applause rolled through the room, hesitant at first, then rising, till the sound filled every corner of the chamber. Asterisk, it wasn't just for her. It was for what she represented: courage without cruelty, conviction without contempt. Asterisk, as she met his gaze across the aisle, something unspoken passed between them. Not friendship, not alliance, just recognition. The kind that only comes when two storms meet and instead of destruction, create light. Asterisk, and for the first time in a long time, Washington felt like it might still be capable of grace. Asterisk, the applause didn't end when the gavel struck. It followed Jasmine Crockett long after she left the chamber into the marble corridors, down the Capitol steps and out into the world beyond Washington. By nightfall, the moment had found its way to every corner of the internet. Asterisk. Clips flooded social media, one from a congressional reporter's phone, another from a network camera that caught Byron Donalds' expression softening just before he spoke. The caption beneath one viral post read, Asterisk, grace meets power. Integrity wins the room. Within hours, the post had millions of views. Asterisk, across the country, the reactions poured in. On college campuses, students watched the clip between classes, their faces lighting up as Crockett's composure radiated through their screens. In community centers and barbershops, her words played on TVs with the same reverence once reserved for political legends. A teacher in Houston paused her lesson, turning the laptop to her students. Watch this, she said softly. This is what leadership looks like. Asterisk. The moment became more than a headline. It became a mirror. For immigrants who had ever been told to wait their turn, for women who had been talked over in rooms full of men, for anyone who had ever been underestimated and still stood tall. Jasmine Crockett wasn't just a politician in that video. She was a symbol of composure under fire, a quiet revolution of grace,